Wow, those are bright lights. O siam ni siaya ai tanishkwalwin kwitsi kwitsnala ihui antha and sachalot antha manas and thaya eat siat mak slahot siam antha imeth kwathan sachalot kwath slahot siam. Hai sepka meet sap kwitwilam eat Squamish eat Musqueam eat Tsleil-Waututh Nations. What I said to you in the very teeny tiny little bit of my language I know, Hunkameetlam or Downriver Hulkameelam, is my respected friends. The feelings I have inside, or I feel really good to see you and to be with you here today. And in Coast Salish way, I introduced myself to you with my ancestral name. I carry the name Ansachalot. And in Coast Salish protocol, I shared with you who my parents are and who my grandparents are. There are a few reasons we do that, but the most important is that you, the audience, know that I know who I am and I know where I come from. Therefore, I know what my responsibilities are as a Welmuchta. I am a grandmother. So my parents are Ernie and Deanna George. My father is the current hereditary leader for my people. My grandparents are the late hereditary chief, John L. George, or in the circle of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, the Right Honorable. And my grandmother was the late Lillian, or Dolly George, as she's known to her friends. And she was also very active in the Indian Homemakers of British Columbia, which was an ancillary group to the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. And they ensured that especially the rural reservations have the social services they needed. And then I raised my hands. And in Coast Salish way, this is a gesture of welcome. Hi, Tsepka, thanking all of you. Meet Tsep-Wutwilam, and I'm welcoming you here to the homelands and waters of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh people. I look forward to sharing some thoughts with you later on this morning, and welcome.
Jin kun man to me and sata tanoyap and sequetal 8 seats made chap ois to tomeo tlas homish all et to homatsquim all et to Tsleil-Waututh all homeo on Hatlin squall when quins quatch no me up 80 squall 8 seats chin to a to tomeo chin quins nach se quash chin a mot not to qua homatston et aslahan was H and what mo 18 noch chet ta come like was anstreit kunst sort la noyap nest ostemel men hat quiz noch newet try equest why 80 to mel quist amas das no wires et noch neo and to mel chinkon man told me up. I just want to thank my dear aunt for her opening words, Carlene, my dear relative from Tsleil-Waututh, and also just want to welcome everybody here to our territory, the shared territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and acknowledge my relatives from Musqueam as well as from Tsleil-Waututh. And I come from the Squamish Nation, and just come to share a few words to thank you, the organizers, for inviting us to be here. There's opportunity for us to learn from each other and to talk to each other and to reflect on the teachings and upbringing that comes from this land, from our families, from our communities, from our nations. And I'm just really grateful to be here and to welcome you to the territory on behalf of my nation, of the Squamish people. Thank you.
Haitapka and Trolaka. Asiam Nasiaya, Thikum Quinansap, Haitapka, Nasiam Nasiaya. And the Chachliat to Leighton Atla, Chacha, Humasqueamas, Thomas. Then a tent of Almat and a man af to Tumkinsiam. Then a mamana, a Comora, Almayuch, a Sophia. Tatanot Smartin, then a mamana, Tatanot Smartin, then a mamana. I turn swallowing, Quitni, Quitnala. Ni hai tanashquels kunita makan. It's in quel hunkaminam kan nasiam nasia. Good morning, my honored and respected friends. My name is Christy Charles. My ancestral name is Chachlia, and I come from here, from this ancient land that we all descend from. But today I represent as a Musqueam, even though my lineage connects me to many Coast Salish nations, including Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh. So thank you to my family for being here today. I am your MC for the day. I am the Vancouver's Poet Laureate and the Musqueam Liaison for the Vancouver Creative City Strategy. So again, welcome to the City of Vancouver's Creative Strategy Symposium. Yeah, meets up Kukwilum. All right. So, first of all, I'd like to introduce Sandra Singh and Deputy Mayor Weim. Sandra Singh is the General Manager for Arts and Culture and Community Services. Let's welcome. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Deputy Mayor Michael Weim, and on behalf of the Mayor and Council, it's a pleasure for us to welcome everyone here today. I also want to welcome, obviously, the 3 different nations. I mean, it's amazing for us to have this with all 3 nations here talking about how we're going to make a more creative city, because we have to do it all together, and I really appreciate the 3. I know Deborah's not here, but we've worked together on some amazing work in Granville Island, and I think that together with what creative cities can be, it won't be creative without really understanding the roots of where we come from and where we can go. I also want to thank all the groups in the room. I think there's some amazing people here, if you look around, from every single organization that really help to bring the creative spirit in Vancouver. We're right now at a bit of a crossroads where we could really make things happen. I think that there's an excitement, but there's also nervous energy where we're losing creative spaces. We're finding it harder for some of the smaller artists to really make it work. And I think together we need to find ways to find spaces and places for people to really grow and kind of bring that creative energy to Vancouver. We attract amazing creative people from around the world to come here and practice. And we need to use that energy to really move forward. I also want to thank the interpreters and the signers and everyone that makes this an inclusive space. I think that's something we need to know moving forward, is that some of our civic theaters aren't even fully accessible. And one of the things we need to make sure is that when we look at what is creative, what we can do, that everyone is involved, different languages, different accessibilities, and different people. So I want to thank everyone for coming today, and I look forward to what the day brings. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. As Christy mentioned, my name is Sandra Singh, and it's my privilege to serve as the General Manager of Arts, Culture, and Community Services for the City of Vancouver. I, too, am honored and grateful to be here today to welcome you on behalf of the Cultural Services team and staff across city departments. This symposium is an opportunity to gather together and dive deeper into the critical issues we've heard from the community over the past year as staff have been working to understand the issues, themes, and aspirations that need to inform the development of Vancouver's next culture plan. Grounding the day in Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh visibility and voice on the land is essential work. Thank you, the people from each of the nations, for your generosity in being here at this event. The Creative City Strategy will set the direction for the city's efforts and investments in arts and culture. We find ourselves in a unique and important moment, one marked by tectonic cultural shifts. It is a time when knowledge keepers and artists are at the heart of addressing the opportunities within the challenges of our time: affordability, accessibility, and racial equity, cultural equity, gender equity, and reconciliation and decolonization. What do these terms mean? How are we addressing them? And how do we need to evolve our work? Artists, culture makers, and creatives are skilled in the kinds of truth-telling that open our eyes to the exclusion and inequities hiding in plain sight, and have the creativity to envision bold new futures for our communities. Today, we call on those skills to imagine innovative strategies to build more equitable opportunities for artists, culture makers, and creatives, to better secure the means and space for their lives and work in our city, and to build meaningful roles in shaping the very form and fabric of Vancouver. The best place to begin these conversations is the distinct conversation about the arts and culture of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. Their arts and cultural practices are the original ones of this place, have been uninterrupted despite the ongoing impacts of colonization, and are central to the future of Vancouver. Thank you for helping us to start our conversation from the right place and to begin in a good way. I'd also like to thank the leadership of Bronislav Henselman, Managing Director of Cultural Services, Lara Honrado, our Assistant Director, and Mayta Brown, the project lead, for their vision in pulling together today, as well as the many members of our advisory committee, the Cultural Services team, our speakers, the MC, facilitators, interpreters, the team here at the VCT for welcoming us. Everyone has worked together to put together a meaningful series of dialogues and discussions. And this is an important day. And I'm looking forward to the results of your discussions and considerations and how it's going to continue to, how they're going to inform and shape the future of Vancouver. So thank you all for joining us, and in advance for sharing your wisdom, creativity, time, and energy. Thank you.
Hi, Tsepka. Thank you, Deputy, and thank you, Sandra. I first of all would like to explain, my beautiful Auntie Carlene shared about our protocol and why it's important to share our name and who we are and where we're from. And I first of all like to apologize to you, Sandra, as I mispronounced your name. It's Sandra Singh. It's very important that we represent who we are, so I just wanted to honor that I get your name correct. Heichka. I'd like to next introduce Kamala Todd. Kamala Todd is the Indigenous Arts and Culture Planner for the City of Vancouver and an all-around amazing woman. It's my complete honor to know her. And for those of you who don't know her, Kamala Todd is a prime example of how working with nations and how to represent in an honorable way. So I'm just so thankful to know this beautiful woman, Kamala Todd.
Hi, Christy. Tansei Nia Kamala. As Christy said, I'm the city's Indigenous Arts and Culture Planner, which is a new position, and I think a sign of all the good things to come and all the good work that has been done, and that we're all a part of, that you are all a part of. I was born and raised in these beautiful lands, but I myself am not of these lands. My ancestors are Métis Cree and Eastern European. So I have a deep sense of gratitude to the people of these lands, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people and their ancestors. And I'm learning every day what it means to live on someone else's land. I'm learning every day that this is a place of the Hunkaminam and Squamish languages, that this is a place with thousands of years of continuity. And I'm learning, as according to my own teachings of reciprocity and gratitude and responsibility and humility, how I can work towards decolonizing this place that I have called home for many years and where my children were born. And what I recognize, I would say probably one of the main turning points for me was a film project that I did with the Tsleil-Waututh First Nation, because I'm also a filmmaker. And I was taught about the importance to their community that the Tsleil-Waututh people are visible, as they would say and continue to say, to put the face of the Tsleil-Waututh back on the map of the traditional territory. And that really got me thinking about how important it is to see yourself reflected on the land. Since then, I've learned so much from other people of these lands. And Deborah, who will be here soon, talks about blanketing the city, you know, the importance of language to Hausalam and all of the important work that's being done around reminding us who aren't from these lands the depth of continuity here. And it's helping me in my work to look at ways to decolonize, because I work in arts and culture, to see that the colonial landscape, this built form that we live in, reinforces the erasure, and it reinforces mythologies that this was an empty land, that it was built by white men according to certain values and laws. But there are laws that have been here for thousands of years. There are languages that have been here for thousands of years. There are protocols and ways of living here that currently we're not necessarily following. And so how can I learn those, and how can I support that becoming more about how decision-making happens here in Vancouver? So I think for those of us who aren't from here, it's really powerful to think about how to live on someone else's land and what our responsibilities are. And public art and visibility are incredibly powerful part of that as we start to transform the built environment and reflect more of the nature of this place. And people are doing really good work in that area, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So Deborah Sparrow is on her way, and when she gets here, she can also say a few words of welcome to you. But I think we're going to just get started, and she'll just come along and join our conversation. And thank you all for being here. Hi, hi. So really, this is about having a conversation. You have one too on your other side. I'm not going to talk too much, but if you want, I can do a leading question, or you can just say something.
Sure, go for it.
I guess the main question, of course, is when we talk about visibility on the land, or visibility and voice, how do we get past things just being adornment or decoration, or some way kind of just nothing really changing in terms of structural change, system change, and the landscape itself?
I had a little conversation with Carleen about 2 seconds ago about who would go first. Usually I let my elders go first, but she told me to go first, so I listen to my elders when they tell me to do things sometimes. I think, yeah, it's a good question, and I welcome the leading questions. There is, a lot to be said around visibility, and I think that even on the concept of territorial acknowledgements, which I think are going through their own kind of questioning of utility, which I kind of, not to waffle on it and kind of not come down on one side or the other, but I think territorial acknowledgements, like a lot of the visibility stuff, is has a context in which it was quite provocative, quite disruptive. So, I go back to the 1970s and 80s when our elders were being asked, just starting to be asked to do territorial acknowledgements, and at that time there was still a lot of denial in Canadian society around our people's place in this society and our people's sovereignty in this society. Going back even when the Canadian Constitution recognized Indigenous rights or Aboriginal rights and treaty rights, there was a time when it was disruptive, and then because we've been doing it for so long and it's become so normalized, it's no longer disruptive. So the question is, what's the next thing that's disruptive? And then I think in addition to that, there's also layers of, yes, creating I think the visible is really important, and as a part of continuing that, the next step is what's the kind of redress that can happen at a very institutional level where we're actually providing skills and capacity and opportunity to communities that for so long have been marginalized from access to those things.
Thank you. Deborah's here. Yay. She brought her blanket to help us hold this space. Did you want to say you're welcome now that you're here, or should we just go down that way? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalselam. There's not too much more that I can add to that, except we are at a really exciting time right now. As you all have seen on the news, our former Attorney General, Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould, has been breaking down barriers. She's holding up a system that is supposed to work for all. And just to bring it down to the level of a city, it's really important to recognize, in order to work any kind of reconciliation, there has to be an equitable partnership. Many of our communities are, I can't speak for my colleagues sitting here, but I know my colleague in the audience, Michelle, George, and I, this kind of work is on the side of our desk. This isn't our full-time paid job. So in order for governments to move forward with any kind of reconciliation, there has to be that equitable partnership. And unfortunately, in this day and age, it equates to money or funding. And then everybody gets uptight because you all are out there competing for the same pot of money that we are. And we are at a disadvantage already because we don't have full-time employees that can be working the system. So the system fails us. It's almost like we are targeted to keep Indigenous core values, Indigenous ways of knowing and ways of being in the background. And my grandfather always taught me, sitting at his kitchen table, looking out his dining room window, we could see the city of Burnaby, Capitol Hill, the city of Vancouver, while we're sitting in the district of North Van. And he would say, they're not going anywhere, we're not going anywhere. We need to find a way to coexist. Doesn't mean their ways are better or our ways are better. We have to find a way to work together. We have to find a way to get along. And as I shared in my opening welcome, I'm a grandmother. And those words have never rung so true since my grandchildren have been born. And now I'm more bold about stating the things that we need as Indigenous, as the Tsleil-Waututh people. Because we're not going anywhere. We have survived. We have overcome, and we are thriving. So you need to be partners with us, equitable partners. I saw a meme, or I think that's what they're called on Facebook, showing my age here. The difference between equal and equitable. And it was 3 people standing at a fence. Equal, all the boxes were, because they couldn't see over, so equal, all the boxes were the same height. And still there were people who could not see over the fence. Equitable was, they had the right size boxes so they could see over the fence. So what we need is to be equitable at this table, and that means resources. Until we can find a way to make any kind of programming happen, we are always at a disadvantage. As for putting our face back on the land, Tsleil-Waututh has done that. We will continue to do that. Calceolum was talking about it being, sorry, I can't remember the words that you used now. Disruptive. I'm okay with using disruptive, but I also am a teacher by trade, so I look at these things as teachable moments. And then once you learn that, so our co-sailors protocols are comfortable now, but they're kind of losing the context. What's the next step? So we take the next step together, and that's what this work like this is all about. Let us hold the pen with you in writing policies, because that's the way your system works. That way our perspective is reflected in those words on the paper. Whereas our Tsleil-Waututh, our teachings, our laws, our oral, we know how to work together. We know how to move forward together without having to write those things down, because it's been ingrained in us since time out of mind. So when you hear Jody Wilson-Raybould invoking those laws of the big house, those kinds of laws are in every Indigenous community, and that's what we're invoking here today. Thank you.
hear your intro. You're welcome. It should be. Try.
Hello.
Hey, Debbie.
I want to apologize for being late, but there's a saying that when you show up late, you want the most attention. So here I am, wanting all the attention because I'm a sparrow. You know, I brought the blanket as a metaphor for who we are as people, because it lays the foundation of who we are, and we stand on it, and everything that we're talking about today is built from that blanket in our traditional homes, and that's where the values come, and they're intertwined and inbred in each and every one of us. And when Carleen talked about the boxes, there's somebody down across the border here that's building a wall, and everybody's standing with those boxes looking over the wall. But our goal is to come back to who we are and be the eagle and fly above it. Because we have so much work to do, as they mentioned, and we're at a place where we stand strong in who we are, in the foundation of our people, because of our fathers, our grandfathers, our great-grandfathers. And I would like to just start by inviting all of our ancestors to be with us here today. It's because why we exist, and everything that we say. And I know these two very well, and I've listened to them, and I hear in them the very things that my grandfather said to me, because all of the leaders together 50 and 100 years ago had the same thing in their heart about how they wanted to lead their people. And today, because of assimilation and because of the way we're being educated in the mass system, we sometimes are taught to go away from ourselves, as maybe some of you have been. I'm sure that if you look into any one of your histories, you're going to find the same foundation. And then for some reason, we all want to be the same when we go to school and universities, and we all have to get the same mark. Well, you're all still part of that master plan in this place we called Mother Earth. And we have to get together, as Carleen said, and we have to work together, because we are all in this together now. And the way the world is going, and I said this on Friday when I discussed some out at UBC, I don't know where we're going, and sometimes I don't want to go with you. I don't want to go to the moon when Trudeau announced he's going to start pouring money in to go out there. And I said, you've made a big enough mess here, why do you want to go out there and make one? We need money here. We need to build the foundation of this earth again, or else we're not going to have one. And that might sound scary, and it is, because we're at a place that's very scary. And we want to suck everything we can out of the earth and say we need jobs, we need jobs. But you know what? We're not going to have jobs if we're going to continue doing what we're doing. And I don't have the answer. I'm not here to say, what are you going to do about it? I'm going to say, let's look at this master plan together, as Carleen mentioned, and figure out how we're going to do this so that there's a balance. We're way off our balance, and we need to bounce back. And one of my family members said, you have to realize that we live in this time frame now, and that things are changing, and that our elders would change with it. And I said, you're absolutely right. I'm not going to argue with you about that, but I'm going to tell you something else. Our grandfather told me, sitting in his kitchen, every day with him, listening to him tell me the conversations that he had when he was growing up. He said, change is good, it's good, but not all of it. You have to keep parts of who you are ingrained deeply into who you are as people. And that's the reflection of these blankets when we stand on them, when we have ceremony that honors whatever the ceremony is, that those don't change. Some things don't change, but we can change a little part of it. Every time I make a blanket, I think about that. Every time I make a blanket, I ask for him to be with me so that I have a better understanding of where we're going. And I ask him to come and be with me and give me and our people the inspiration we need to deal with what we have to in the future, and it's tough. So, I'd like to just say that I'm honored to be here on behalf of him and all of our people that have gone before us, because it's for them that we exist. Thank you.
Did you want to talk a bit about language? I didn't get a chance to talk about it.
Sorry, what was the question?
Well, I know how important language is to you, and I know how important it is to, well, I understand, to see the language in the city itself. And I know you're doing a lot of work in that area.
Yeah. The language, I mean, yeah, it is important to me, but I think more importantly, it's important to my people. It's important to our peoples, our languages. And language, I've spent a lot of time thinking about language, and partly because the question I get asked all the time is like, what's the utility of it? Like, what's the value of our young people learning our language when, you know, there's jobs? And so in order to have responses to that, I spend a lot of time thinking about what am I going to say. And of course, the response is different when I'm talking to our own people, because sometimes our own people get it, right? They perhaps just weren't raised with a value for the language for whatever reason. And we can come up with lots of reasons why that might have been the case. But, you know, language is, it is in one way, it is a symbol. And we know it's a symbol because if we talk about taking away anybody else's language, people have a visceral reaction to it. Like if today I said everybody in this room can't speak English anymore, or bad things will happen to you, there's, you know, it's not just an idle threat, but it would actually happen. There's a visceral reaction that people have when it's in their own language. And so then we know it's a symbol. It's a symbol of power, symbol of connection, a symbol of identity, and things like that. And then it's also a tool for communication. Like I can communicate my feelings, my desires, my hopes, my dreams, my fears, my anxieties. And then you get into that kind of stuff. And so I think for our elders, what they always said to us was that our language is important because it's sacred. It's been handed down from our ancestors to the next generation to the next. My grandmother used to always say that to me. And it also that our elders from Squamish would talk about that they seen, you know, what Debbie is talking about with the changes that were happening, and the changes that our people embraced in some ways, but also that our elders recognized that some of the changes that were happening meant that our people weren't treating each other the way that they had seen our people treat each other in the olden days. The respect for each other, the taking care of each other, the uplifting of each other, the grooming of our young people to be contributing members of our society, the way that we would share resources so that everybody was taken care of. All those values that had sustained us for a long time, our elders were saying, we're seeing the young people not doing that anymore. We're seeing those young people become adults and not do it anymore, and we're starting to not practice those ways of being. And they felt like that because we weren't speaking the language anymore, we weren't learning things in the language, that we were losing a part of that way of being. And so they felt like if the language came back, then those ways of being would come back. And we're seeing it now with our young people who are becoming speakers, that it's when you talk about our culture, or you talk about our community, or talk about the issues in our community, and it's hard for me to explain, and I don't know if any people that might be bilingual or multilingual know what I'm talking about, but when you are forced to talk about it in our languages, it takes on a very different tone, feeling, and also creativity. Because when we're trying to solve the problems of our community, when you're trying to solve them in another language, you actually are forced to draw upon all of this wisdom and knowledge that is only accessible through the language. And so I think all of that stuff is for our people is the reason why our languages are so integral and so important. And then it gets into the, kind of the main piece for the public is that language is, without a doubt, in my opinion, one of the most material aspects or definitions of what redress and reconciliation actually looks like, because it's very clear. If residential schools hadn't happened, if colonization hadn't happened, we would all be speaking our languages fluently, and our families would be speaking our languages fluently. So if reconciliation, and I know it's becoming a tired word sometimes and overused perhaps, and we should try and find other terms to really talk about what we're meaning. But if we're talking about redress, which is our repatriation, that if those things hadn't happened, if at the very least reconciliation means undoing all the damage that was done, then language is without a doubt one of those things. And so the question is, how does the broader society, which has benefited from that oppression today, is still continuing to benefit from that oppression, how does the broader society use its power and influence and wealth to participate in that redress and repair of all the things that had been damaged that they had benefit from? If residential schools didn't happen, if the Indian Act didn't happen, the amount of people in Vancouver and in this country would not be as wealthy as they are right now. Because imagine, we just had a launch for some lands at Jericho, and I had a question from a reporter asking about, there's lots of wealthy people in this neighborhood, how do you think they're going to react to what your nations want to do? And I was like thinking about it afterwards, and I was thinking, if the Indian Act wasn't written the way it was, and our rights weren't deprived the way they were, and we weren't considered second-class citizens for most of Canadian history, our people probably would have bought land when we were able to, and we would have owned land in that area. Even if I think about owning land in the Canadian legal sense, a title. But we didn't, and we don't, because there's a history where clearly we were banned and barred from purchasing property or even hiring lawyers. So there's a clear example of how we got to where we're at today. And I think language is a value for our people. So again, if reconciliation means anything, that it means that the broader society learns to value the things that Indigenous people value. And if language is one of the things that we value, and I think protecting our Mother Earth is one of the things that we value, then reconciliation can at least mean everybody else values those things, because again, that's the way things would be if the colonization hadn't happened.
Thank you. Yes. So this whole thing about our responsibilities as the city, as organizations, as funders, the theme of visibility on the land and visibility and voice on the land is definitely a big part of the cultural services work right now and the Creative City Strategy. So I'm just curious if you have reflections, any of you, about is this an important area to focus on, and why is it so important to think, your idea of blanketing the city, and why are we putting so much emphasis on the visibility of your cultures right now?
Okay, I just want to, before I answer that, or maybe I'll answer it together, but I'd like to just follow up to what you said about buying land. I don't remember them buying any off us in the beginning. We shouldn't have to buy back our own land or put any bids in anywhere. And when you announced it's on ceded territory a few years back by our past mayor, and then ask us to buy it back, there's something wrong there. And so if we look at reconciliation, is that part of it? And so I'm coming from a perspective of the teachings, as always, and when I began my journey to learn from my ancestors what the value of the blankets were, I made sure that I stayed every day with my grandfather to learn about what was happening at contact or just after contact when the first ship arrived. And, right up Capilano River, when Captain Vancouver arrived there, he became friends with Capilano. And Joseph Baker, his map maker, also became a great friend. But while he was a friend, and after they earned the trust of Capilano, and because of language barriers, they got in the canoes and they started going mapping. And then going back to England and claiming that land and putting stakes in. While we were being nice to him because of language, we didn't understand what he was doing. And the rest, they say, is history. And so it really intertwines when we say, how do we move forward? And how valuable is even our language? And when I asked my grandfather why he didn't teach us, we all know the answer, that he said you would never use it, it would never be valuable to you. And today when we teach our language, and we have a university course on language, I was upset about it. I was not in support of our language being taught to other people. And when I go and listen to some of the students who are taking the language, when they graduate, I see the loss in the language. They can't understand or feel the depth of why we spoke the language the way we did, and they're missing it. And so the teachings behind the language were not just what came out of your mouth, but what your sense to relationship to the land was and is. Everything we did reflected the land, and the language spoke it. But in understanding all of that, building a blanket, standing in front of the loom, creating mathematical patterns, understanding that the women were so intelligent to be able to use mathematics the way they did, adding, subtracting, dividing, creating beautiful patterns, creating beautiful dyes that they had to go out into the land and gather, scientifically put all of these dyes together, as everyone around the world did. I was in awe of them. And I wondered why there had to be an 80 or 90-year gap that we didn't see them or be raised with them, but we all know that too, and that's residential school. If they take, what did Trudeau say, if you no longer speak your language and you no longer exercise your culture, then you are citizens like us. We never wanted to stop speaking the language. We never wanted to stop practicing our culture. We were forced into it. And so there's a larger history here than just those statements that some people make. And so this land that we call Vancouver is as old as time. And it's as ancient as any place in the world. And yet, every time we drive down here, we see nothing that reflects its ancient land and people because of what happened. And so we have little pockets of land left that we're being squeezed out of because we don't have any more because of what happened. And now we're forced to buy it back. And people say, well, what do you people want? Well, what we really want is to go back and remember what the first people who signed those documents said to us, that every single thing that they were going to push forward in terms of mines and forestry, they were going to share with us. Have they shared it? And then they ask us what we want. Every piece of timber that comes down is built for a home, came off the land we lived in, the one we wanted to share with everyone. Did we get paid back for it? No. Every fish that was caught in the water, every industry that's been built in this country was built on the history of who we are as people. And we wanted to share it. But we got kicked while we were down for it. And so we stand on the blankets again. We remember our teachings, and we're still being nice. And we'll find a way, and we'll teach you part of that, because that's what value is. That's what being who we are is. And those are the teachings that have been passed down to the values of the land, that the land is just not a resource to strip, it's a resource that we're actually connected to, and so are you. And I'm just following up on what I said earlier, that how valuable that land is how valuable each and every one of us is. And we must remember that, or we won't have it anymore. And when I started weaving some 30 years ago, I didn't start because I wanted to be an artist, or I wanted to be famous or have any recognition. I wanted to learn because I wanted to know who my people were, who were the women. And when I started that journey, I was so taken back and excited that I was a part of a history that was amazing, and the women were amazing. And when I asked my grandfather one day, sitting with him, if he ever knew anything about weaving, he said, yeah, I do know something. And then I said, why haven't you told me? And he said, you didn't ask. But I couldn't ask for something that I never seen before. I didn't know we had such amazing people doing such amazing things because it was all wiped out, so we didn't see it. So we didn't see the value. And so our esteem was low until we went to winter ceremony in our longhouses where we felt secure and safe and where we felt the ties to our history again and where the language was being spoken and the culture was being addressed. And when you went in there, you felt like you were home. And what we want to do today is take just some of those values, not all. And it's a place of privacy. It's a place that we still are connected to our people. A place where it's not gone. We don't feel inadequate. And so we want to take a little bit of that and transfer it back out here into this world that's ever so in need of it. And it's not probably more likely in just our culture, it's in many. We're all on the masterpiece. Every one of us is on that masterpiece of life in the blanket because every one of our cultures did this and now think it's something removed when it is actually the very fiber of who we are. And that's what the land means to me and to my people. It's a reflection of who we are, and we have to respect it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Carlene? Okay, I kind of got lost in the two questions, so I'm just going to speak.
Yes.
Just to respond to what Deborah was saying about resources, I get to spend time with different groups of people on different committees and boards that I sit on. And I kept saying, we're here to protect the lands, the waters, the trees, the salmon. And I said out loud once, I wish I knew, I have to go back home and find out what the word is for resources. Because when I say resources in a crowd like this, people think, oh, that's what we make money off of. This is what drives our economy. But that's not the way we look at those resources. And an older, Sayas, older brother was there from a different community, and he says, Carlene, you know the word. I said, oh, do I? What is it? And please forgive me if I'm saying it wrong. Sa'ashtin. And in our language, that means food. So really, it means that what sustains us. That what sustains us as human beings. And then when you talk about language, people say I've heard speakers say, we have this loss of language. Well, no, God damn it. It was stolen. It was ripped. It was lopped off in the generations before us. And we had no say. We had strong language warriors in each of our communities, though, that stood strong and held on to it. That is their gift. The weavers, those coming up with the weaving, that was their gift. I've tried 3 times to learn how to weave. And I do okay. But my sister, my youngest sister, is the weaving warrior in our family. That is her gift. So we have to look at each other and figure out what our gifts are and prop them up, hold them up, support them in those kinds of areas. Language. Calceolum is a language warrior. And I use warrior in a sense not to go out there and antagonize people. They stand strong in their gift. That is their responsibility. And it's our responsibility to support them in moving that forward. So when we talk about putting language back on the land, putting art and culture back on the land, it's not for show. It's not for the city to say, oh, look, this is what we did for the Three Nations. Pat us on the back or head. It is recognizing our ties to this place. We all have a creation story that ties us to the lands and waters of this place. And that's why I choose, as a public speaker, I choose to use lands and waters, because I learned quickly, early in my beginning stages of public speaking, that territory, you use the word territory, and Juanitan people, they clench. I would rather you be open, have that open heart and that open mind to listen to my words, rather than sitting there all clenched up, because nothing will come in. My words won't come in to your space because you're already, I don't like that word. It makes me uncomfortable. I think it's great that we make people feel uncomfortable, but you can do it in a way that says, okay, I'm feeling uncomfortable, what do I do? Instead of like, wow, do I ever feel crappy? I think I'll get out of here, right? Right? Embedded in the language is that Tsleil-Waututh I was telling you about. Tsleil-Waututh is our teachings, our laws. So it's important for us to hold on to that language in any way that it can come to us. And like Deborah, I understand, making it a university course and teaching it to anyone who is really honestly interested hurts. So we have to take care of that hurt first in our communities. Because our not too distant ancestors were corporally punished for speaking the language. So we're sitting in our homes, in our communities, by our home fires thinking, how do we get over that? How do we heal through that? How do we work through that? And this is one step. This is one way. Because the younger generations have grown up with this education system. And that's one way to reach them. I was actually at UBC when they restarted the Untitled program, and I went to my grandfather and I said, this is what UBC is trying to do, and they're working with Musqueam to create a memorandum of understanding. What do you think? And he said, I think you should go for it. Because how else are you going to hold on to something in this day and age with all this change that is happening? Once we get to know what the words are and what the teachings are behind those words, what the meaning, the deep meanings of those words are, then that will come shining through. If we have enough non-native people learning about our languages and learning our languages, that puts more warriors on our side, I think. Because you have a teeny tiny understanding of where we're coming from as Wemel people. As for putting art on the land, that's all well and good, but it can't just stop at that showpiece. There has to be the teachings behind it, the story behind it, and why it's important to this place. I was never more proud than when our artists were able to put stellar pieces in the city chambers. And the pride that I saw reflected in my parents, because their grandnephew, my nephew, was the Tsleil-Waututh artist that was able to do that. And each of those artists got to stand up and speak to why they chose this design to reflect their nations within this city chamber, council chamber. And that's important. Because even if just a handful of people know that story, people know it. And it's their responsibility then to share that knowledge. And then it just grows, right? So Jordan Galley was our Tsleil-Waututh artist, and he explained what the piece meant to him and what he thought about before he even designed it. And I apologize, I can't remember the whole story, but just even to the maple tree and the leaves that he incorporated in his design. It speaks to our spiritual connection to the land. That spiritual connection reflects our shahalmas. Shahalmas means our sacred obligation to know, and in this day and age, to protect those lands and waters. So we're looking at this, the city strategy, creative strategy for the city. I mean, no disrespect, I just can't remember the right title. We need to have our people's perspectives reflected in that. And that it's something that we can work together on. And again, it has to be well-resourced for the nations to be able to participate fully. And if the city of Vancouver is honest about trying to build, well, I don't want to say reconciliation anymore because I totally agree. It's overused. We've gotten too comfortable with it, so let's find another word. The redress. We've done reconciliation. You've acknowledged us. We've done the Coast Salish protocols. Now what's the next step? But we need to take that together. Thank you.
Thank you. So taking it beyond just being a showpiece, as Carleen talked about, is really important. Recently in Conversations, Salem, you talked about cultural sovereignty and the importance, like how your culture, the expressions seen on the land can help promote cultural sovereignty.
Yeah. English is funny, and I actually really like English language. I know like lots of Indigenous people don't, and I understand why. I just find English to be a very funny language and very strange. And I like strange things. English has a way of, so one of the things English does that I find really fascinating is that it's very good at coming up with names for things, right? If you want a name for something, it's very easy just to make something into a name, and it generates names all the time. You can put words together to generate new names. And so it does this thing where it creates names for everything, terms and names for all kinds of stuff. So sometimes the words from English are sometimes useful, sometimes not. Reconciliation being an example of that. Or they're useful up to a certain point. But sometimes I like to use English when talking about ideas or concepts that are going to be helpful to our communities, that are perhaps going to be useful for a bit until they're not. And so I think about this kind of idea of cultural sovereignty, and what does sovereignty mean, but also just this idea that when it comes to culture and it comes to imagining culture or a strategy for culture, that there's some important concepts to understand within that, in the context of Vancouver, in the context of being on unceded territory. And something that our nations have started to do really intentionally, which is try to ask people to stop referring to it as Coast Salish territory. And our nations have told that to the city, we've told that to the province, and we've told that to the feds. Because Coast Salish refers to a larger group of cultures and peoples, and they don't all have title or rights to this territory. Just our three nations do. And so when somebody stands up and says, welcome to Coast Salish territory, well, somebody from Seattle, that includes them, or somebody from Victoria, and that includes them. And over there, it's the same thing. You know, there's different nations that have title and rights to the territory. And so when we think about that title and rights, and that this is Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh territory, and I think about culture here, there's a risk of often doing things that are either pan-Indigenous or pan-Coast Salish almost, which is that we're acknowledging Coast Salish, but we're actually not acknowledging or giving equity to the people from this territory. And so there is a need to embed cultural sovereignty within the work that we do that is paying specific respect and attention to the cultures of our three communities in Vancouver, and the cultural practices of our three communities, and the artistic identities of our three communities, both by the practitioners and elevating the practitioners, but also elevating, I think, for me at least, the particular language or motifs or styles that I think are used to represent our cultures. And so, you know, there's these concepts when we think about our institutions and going beyond reconciliation or going beyond the territorial acknowledgements, and we think about public institutions, and I've raised this before, but you think about how much money has the city of Vancouver spent on public institutions to fund them over the lifetime of the city. So I just use examples like this building, which I believe is a civic institution. The Museum of Vancouver, which is a civic institution. The Vancouver Art Gallery, which is not technically a civic institution, but receives a lot of support from the city of Vancouver. So an example that I used recently, actually, when thinking about, or actually, when we talked about this, and I can say this because somebody was on the Parks Board at the time, which I'll kind of give acknowledgement to. They're now a council member, and currently the deputy mayor, so. But I'll just a quick story to highlight an example of this. A festival production company had done a festival in Squamish for a number of years. And respectfully, their engagement with my nation was quite minimal. They brought a dance group on. That was pretty much it. And so it was, and I laughed because I told them this, it's not like I'm talking behind their back. I actually said this to the organizers' faces and said, you know, this is an example of what doesn't work. And so when they came to wanted to organize a big, huge 40,000 person festival in Stanley Park and tried to ask the Parks Board for permission to do that, the Parks Board responded and said, well, you need to get permission from the three nations. Or we're not going to give it to you unless you get permission from the three nations. And so they're like, okay, we'll have to go through the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh. And so they started that work of engaging the nations. And then that forced us to be able to, or allowed us to be able to say, we'll give you our support, but it has to look like this. You have to be able to support us in these ways. You have to employ our people. You have to prioritize our artists, our musicians. You have to incorporate our people into the festival itself. You have to give visibility to our culture and our history, and especially Stanley Park. You are not organizing a 40,000 person festival in Stanley Park that doesn't acknowledge the history of our communities in that place, because it's so sacred to us and the history there. And so we kind of started this path of walking together and talking about what that would look like. And it was really interesting because they offered opportunities for employment for our members and ways of incorporating our artists into some of the visual arts as well as musical arts. And so it was interesting where the organizers really had to respond to the requests from our communities around what it looked like to meaningfully engage and respect our peoples. And there's mistakes, there's always mistakes, and I think that's the important thing, is that there's, not all of our communities are probably going to agree on whether it was good or great or bad, or what can be improved, or what some of us liked or others didn't. It's just like anything else. But what I appreciated about it, or what I learned from it, was that by forcing that, by the Parks Board actually saying, we're putting a gateway here, and you have to go in through these gates in order to get through our gate. And so that's one example of that. What would it look like for civic policy, or even policy within nonprofits, to actually kind of mirror that same level of respect for the cultural sovereignty of our communities? That if the city was to give a big chunk of land to this public art gallery, but actually to put conditions on how are you going to respect the cultural sovereignty of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh given that we've acknowledged that this is unceded territory. And when we look at something like the Vancouver Art Gallery and look through the history of all its exhibits, how many of them have prioritized artists, not Coast Salish artists, but artists from the Three Nations? How often? From the entire history, 60 or 70 years that it's been in existence. So I really think about this concept of cultural sovereignty, which is that we have to embed within their policy frameworks this prioritization and a requirement to have a conversation around what our communities want, whether that's employment or mentorship or training or capacity or funds or whatever it is. And that's going to evolve and change. And our communities are at different stages or different abilities to respond to that. You know, we get inundated with requests sometimes, and we have to gauge the scale and scope and how we're going to respond. But I think that that's kind of where I really want to see things go, and I really want to see embedded within the policy frameworks of the city, and so that, you know, it becomes, there's a real tangible legacy is what I really hope to see happen. That our people really benefit, and that our people can build careers and sustain their families off of this, so that the amount of wealth that is floating around in the city around arts and culture is actually feeding our people as well, because it's feeding everybody else, or feeding a lot of other people. So.
And to follow up on that, you know, just Kalseelam was talking about liking English, and English is really funny. Priority doesn't mean that, I mean, it means that we prioritize the Indigenous, the Three Nations first, but not at the expense of something else. Because we've been there. We've been there, we've experienced that. So it's making that space in a respectful way, in an honorable way, so that we have our integrity. That's what sovereignty is. And sovereignty doesn't mean that we're going to come in and say, this is the way things are going to go from now on. No, it just means that we get to reflect, we get to project, we get our perspective of our responsibilities here to this land. We're just asking for that space in the policy writing, in the prioritizing, in carrying out the work. We are inclusive. We don't exclude anyone. We just need that space to show you how governance works. That includes everybody. Tsleil-Waututh has done that since the beginning. That's why we've survived. We have never excluded anyone. And we've always did our best to work with everyone, because we know you're not going anywhere.
You know, there's a beautiful saying, it says, without a vision, people perish. So they took our vision away, and we were almost on the verge of perishing. But because we held on by a fine string, maybe it was spinning from the universe, from our ancestors to us, invisibly, we're able to rebuild who we are in this community we live in. And this land reflects that, as we've all talked about. And I just want to add to what you were saying about Stanley Park, because I worked with them for that. Are we talking about renaming Stanley Park, by the way? I hope. Because it's not a park. It's my grandmother's, great-grandmother's home. When my grandmother, great-grandmother lived there with Tommy Cole, a knock came on the door, and she was quite elderly. And some red coats with some guns were standing there with a musket in her face, and they said, "You have 45 minutes to go. We'll give you 45 minutes." So her husband and her grabbed some little bags in their suitcases and stuffed everything that was valuable to them. And they escorted them out. And when they got to the road, they turned around and watched as they burnt her house down. And she came back to Musqueam, and she passed away there, and I really was a little girl when the last time I got to see her. And her name was Matilda. But she wasn't the only one removed that way. All of the people were, so it was our home and village. It wasn't a park. And to us, it still isn't. And so I'd take my grandfather and sit on the bench, and he'd say, "This is where the house was." And I said, "Did you ever come here?" Because he was back and forth to Musqueam, and he said, "Yeah, I stayed with her off and on." And he said, "I would play out in the front on the beach and run up and down the beach, and one day this lady was there, and she was asked me in our language again, 'Who are you?' And if you come to any one of our villages, that's the first thing we're going to say is, 'Who are you? Who's your people? Who's your relative? Who's your mom and dad?' Because we all know each other. We're all related. And that's the hard part when you talk about this land and its divisions. To try and divide us is like impossible. Because we're all one people on this lower mainland land here, and we have relatives all throughout it. So he just said, this woman said to him, "Who are you?" in his language. And he said who he was, and he said it was Simon Baker's mother. And she was clam digging for her dinner. And so we see that in that land, and we've heard this many times, I'm sure you have, that when the tide is out, the table's set. Well, I'm sorry, but we have no more tables to set because there's hardly any food left there. So Sandy Park is as close to us as any parts of our land, Jericho, and all of the places that we live. So, again, on my journey, I got to have the opportunity to work with the city of, with the mural painters at the beginning of the year. And one of my ideas was that I'm steeped in this tradition, I'm steeped in who I am, and I can now grow. And so as I grow and I come above the seed that was planted, and I share the vision of the beauty with everyone, I want to grow to the balance of the contemporary world as well, and not just for all of you to think that we're all just so traditional that we don't understand anymore. We do. We're educated. We're balanced. And so, talking with the mural painters, I said, I want to take what I've learned, because I'm also a graphic artist. Speaking of graphic art and our people, I worked with Nike in Canada to design the jersey for Team Canada, and we won. We won the gold. So that was an opportunity for our people that was supposed to do miles of opportunities for us, but did it? I don't really think it did. In fact, I don't remember having one visitor come to Musqueam during the Olympics. And we, in Canada, asked all the Aboriginal artists to come and be here. And when we did, mostly people didn't even know we were there. And all the artists that came lost so much money because there was nobody coming to see us, and it wasn't advertised. The only ones that were spearheaded were the high esteem artists at the time. And it was sad because we were promised opportunities that really never happened. But in speaking to that, learning what it was that our people, why did they reflect the kind of designing they did? What were their form lines like? Why are they so different than the Northwest Coast? That's something that's so dear to my heart, and protocol, and being accountable for ourselves, being accountable for our protocol, being accountable for how we exercise that. In driving in the city of Vancouver and seeing Northwest Coast art everywhere, I would always be unnerved by it. Because I thought to myself, why is this all out here and none of ours is? And so back again, when I was starting the textiles, I thought, I'm not going to stop doing what I do on behalf of all of us until I wrap the city of Vancouver in a blanket. Because this is your history too, by the way. This is what we talk about when we talk about what is the vision here for all of us. And so I began that journey of wrapping the city individually by starting at the airport with my other Weaver women that I work with, heading into CBC, them acknowledging us, hanging a big blanket inside CBC, over by Safeway, Ian Gillespie from, I can't remember the name of his company, West Bank, took a step forward without any other reason other than to say, I want Musqueam represented here in front of Safeway. Go figure. So we did the window box there, and it's got the beautiful weavings hanging, so when you drive up the street, you'll see them. So the beginning, it started, and so then I thought, well, when the mural painters wanted to work, I thought, well, how about if we combined all of these designs? And then they said to me, that's great. And we met together a few times. We came up with some ideas. I worked with the graphic artists. And for some unknown reason, I did not know that they were going to be so amazingly agreeing to, and we put them on the pillars of this, under the Granville Bridge. And when I went down there and I helped paint a little bit, I took a step back and I was like taken back again in time. And I talked to my ancestors and I said, this is all for you. All of what's put here today is the pillars of our people and the integrity and the beauty of the foundation and what protocol is. And I hold my hands up to those mural painters who came forward, David and Adrian and Gabe, because they get it. They acknowledged and they respected what we could do together. And I advise, if anybody has not seen it, I hope you do, because it's a reflection of the possibilities of what we can do. So when we moved now into Stanley Park, they asked me what I wanted to do there, if I could work with them. And of course, right away, I was like, wow, that would be amazing, but I'm really not sure right now what we should do, and so let me think about it. So they sent a different fellow down because he was going to be responsible for the murals down there. And you know, I was downstairs in my house one day doing my laundry, and I have this nice big dresser there, and the dresser's full of things that I've collected over the years, and standing, looking me right in the face was Matilda, a picture my grandfather had given to me as a gift. And I thought, I better bring Matilda upstairs and hang her on my wall, or Grandpa's going to be upset. So I brought her up, and I happened to have a weaving on my table, and I put Matilda on top of the weaving. And the fellow came over, and we were talking about what we're going to do in Stanley Park, and then he said, boy, that sure is a beautiful picture. And I said, yeah, that's my great-grandmother. And I said, in fact, she used to live in Stanley Park. And he goes, really? And I said, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if we could do the mural with her on it? And he said, well, let's do it. And I said, but can you make her look like that? Because I don't want anything that's going to not look like her. He goes, oh, I've got the masters. So they went to work, we did it. And what that portrait of her, as big as this wall almost right here, did, was to put a face on our history. You were looking at someone who actually lived there at contact period. And that moved me far beyond. In fact, my community too, and I brought my Auntie Jerry down there, my grandfather's youngest daughter. And so that puts visibility again onto the land. And it puts a face on our people, that we're not just here now, that we've always been here. And it's our sovereign right to exercise how we want that to unfold from reconciliation on. Those are the steps we take. And when we talk about language, language is valuable, you bet it is, but you know what, I don't speak. And I don't feel a loss about it. I'm coming from a different perspective because my language is right here. When you look at those blankets, I hope that you look at them and say, wow, who are those people? And the education starts about wanting to know. And when you go anywhere in the world, you look at the history through the art. But this is not art, it's our life. The women didn't stand around pre-contact and say, let's be some artists. And you would be weaving. Because there's not another job. This is it. Now people say to me, you must make a lot of money. I said, I'm not in it for money. However, because we live in the time we do, you darn rights they're valuable. They're worth a lot of money. And that was our money pre-contact. So it has a whole history, a whole life. It has a whole value, and it's who we are as people.
Thank you. So I've been given the 5 minutes. Do you mind just saying a few closing thoughts, Carleen, and then Hoselam?
Yeah, we're done already.
Time moves quick.
Okay, yeah, it does. As for closing thoughts, I just need to follow up with what Deborah was just sharing about weaving and what it costs and stuff. And it just made me think of my youngest sister, because we had a cultural event yesterday, and it was the first time I'd seen her in a while. We're all really very busy people, and it's sad to say, you know, sometimes we don't get together as often as we'd like, but she was sharing with me, she's working on making cedar capes now. And to work with cedar capes, to keep it supple and soft, you need bear grease or deer fat. And what's so amazing about my sister is she doesn't use the tela, the money, she trades. So she traded a fellow over on Vancouver Island one of her speaker blankets for some deer grease or deer fat. And it just speaks to what Deborah was saying. You know, it's unfortunate that, you know, outside of our circles, you have to put a monetary value on something. And what I really wanted to connect earlier about artists, for me, I've grown up with the understanding, with the teaching that our artists, no matter what form of art you're talking about, is our connection to spirit. Because whenever you go into a gallery or whenever you look at a piece of art, it touches your spirit, right? Whenever you hear someone singing or when you ever see someone dancing, you react to it. That's your spirit. So artists are held in high esteem in our communities. And I appreciate that the city is trying their best, or doing their best, but you need to work with us to kind of, you know, steer the canoe in a good way and the right way in order to accomplish some redress and building those relationships with the three nations here. I don't know that I can add any more than that to it, but thank you for being here and thank you for listening.
Right now I'm just feeling very grateful for the opportunity to be on stage with Deborah and Carleen, and just because I have so much respect for them, and so much of what Deb has said, I mean, speaks true to me. And I think that's the thing about it, is that there's lots of things that have been said on the stage that we all agree with each other, right? So it's like finding those moments where you're hearing from voices from the three communities that are saying things together. And I'm picking up on what Deborah said around the language and the weaving patterns, and I completely agree. And I think about this thing as well, even with our Coast Salish style and our art, that too is a language. Our songs themselves are a language, our dances, they're all, you can think of them as language. and because we don't have words for art in our language, right? So they are, you know, like our Coast Taylor style that a number of artists have taken and started to use as a way to identify our particular identity. You know, the carved pieces in the olden days, they all had a utility. There was a reason why they carved them. There was a reason why we put designs. It was very design oriented, not just artistic. It had a purpose. And so there's lots of those kinds of teachings that are embedded in our culture, and I think, you know, for language, the spoken language, you know, the visibility of it and the importance of it, and seeing it and hearing it and things like that, even on the naming piece. And I know that there's work that needs to continue with the City of Vancouver and Dint, I'm just kidding, around naming. And it's funny because, you know, for some people the naming thing is like, when I say some people, I mean Hunitum or Choletan, that they kind of are dismissive of the value of it, that it's also too tokenistic or something like that, which I struggle with, because I disagree with that, partly because, you know, if we can get some of these names back onto the parks and places and stop calling them parks, which I agree with, it really confronts this idea that you can go in through life and ignore or not be aware that this land is ours. That and for so much of Canadian history, like, it's the thing that really I come back to, is that for so much of Canadian history, that was the dominant kind of thought, that no, this is no longer their land, it's, you know, it's Canadian land. And routinely we're fighting back against that. And we continue to have to push that narrative and change that narrative, because there is something far more valuable and interesting and powerful about this place, recognizing and upholding the Indigenous culture and context of this place. Because the reality is, Canada would be a far more interesting place if the Indigenous languages of this country were thriving. Right? You want to be non-American? And so embracing it on the landscape, I think, is really powerful. And then it starts that conversation, like, okay, we're gonna take a place, and we're gonna put the Untitled and Squamish name back on the place. Okay, what's the meaning of that place? What's the history of that place? Now everybody has to learn it. It has to be a part of your history, the parts that we're willing to share. And there's parts that we're not, which is important to acknowledge. There's parts that are not for you to learn, parts that we have to protect, because that's what we were taught to. But we're generous. We've been very generous, and we're continuing to be very generous. And we're continuing to be generous because we see the value in it. We see that there is an opportunity for our communities to be better from having our knowledge and our wisdom of our culture embedded into these things. And then just the last point on this, like, kind of idea of creative city. I think one of the concepts, and when we had this conversation in my community around the creative city strategy, the one concept that really came up from a lot of our elders and our people when we were talking about it was that this concept of, you know, culture within the dominant Vancouver kind of definition is so different than what, you know, our communities talk about when we talk about culture. Because culture for us is land, culture for us is community, culture for us is being able to do things on the land. You know, it's more than just visual arts or theater or music and things like that. And there's concepts of culture that are embedded in a way, and we just practice it. This is who we are. So it really makes me think about, like, if the city was to have a strategy to revitalize or strengthen our cultures, then that makes sense. But the part that we have to figure out together is, what does that look like for us? What parts of our culture can the city actually provide that support for the revitalization and the strengthening? And there's lots. I mean, I absolutely love, and I agree with Deborah, if you get a chance to go down to Granville Island and see her pieces down there, I love seeing it, because it's just so beautiful to see the weaving patterns in the city that way, blown up that way. And your piece at Sunday Park, I loved it so much, because it was such a beautiful portrait to see our ancestors like that. So there's lots of cool things that I think that just make our city more interesting and more valuable and part of this history and context. and there's lots of work that we can do together. And I'm excited about it. I think Carleen said that, it's exciting. We're living in exciting times. But we really just need everybody else to put their own creative energy into thinking about where can I use my influence and power to help support the aspirations of our communities.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to wrap up, but I just wanted to say that, yes, hopefully all of us carry this with us in our work, and that it's not just the kind of initial conversation and we go on with our business, but that we've all learned from your generosity. You continue to help us understand what it means to live here and to carry these teachings in a good way. So thank you all. We do have some, thank you. Deputy Mayor Weeb is going to come in. Christy is going to also join us. Thank you all so much. Do you have the gifts?
I hope everyone enjoyed that. We have gifts. I'd like to obviously thank Carleen, Deborah, and Salem. I think the words are so powerful. I think holding the pen to create policy, I think blanketing the city and changing kind of the visual expression that we can do. And I think everyone in this room should take that away on how we can help lift and support these amazing ideas moving forward. And not only do we have the creative city strategy, but there's also, we're doing a full citywide plan. And I think we need to basically take, ingrain all that we're hearing today and all we do at the roundtables on how to ingrain all of this to create the city that we all want. So thanks everyone, and here we've got.
Thank you so much. So now I'm supposed to introduce.
Oh, let's go hang out.
Yeah. Thank you again. Please give a hand for our beautiful family today. Thank you. So on the schedule, it says that we're supposed to introduce our next speaker, and then I'm supposed to do a piece after. But I think I'm going to jump in, change the schedule, and do my piece now, if that's okay, because it's only fitting for what we just spoke of. I'm going to use my big house voice because that's our teaching, is that we're supposed to project so that the people at the very back of the room can hear. I'm going to share a song and a poem with you to follow up with what my family spoke of today. We have a word in our language called decolonization. Decolonization is to unbind oneself or to free oneself. And that's a time that we're living right now to undo all of these things that have been done and we can walk together. In our cultural ceremonies, every little piece is super important. The things we wear, the way we represent ourselves, it makes us distinct. People from other communities can travel along the land and say, oh, that Christy Charles is wearing beadwork from back east. beadwork from another community. But I was honored to be gifted this stuff. This doesn't represent me as a Musqueam, Squamish, or Tsleil-Waututh, or Coast Salish person, as Taysalo said. My grandma says that to me too. Christy, you can't say you're from Coast Salish. That means everybody comes from the song of the song. And I just want to raise my hands to these beautiful graphic artists over here. But I also want to point out something that we are talking about at this moment. This image right here of this woman holding her hands up like this. I was sitting back there and I said, oh, that's a very beautiful piece. It's so beautiful, but I don't wear that. I don't have a cedar cape like that. I just recently was gifted a cedar hat, but it's not something that I wear as a Musqueam person. So when we're looking at that, we could say, oh, that's a First Nations person. They could be from Northwest Coast. They can be from anywhere because of how they are dressed. We, as the Coast Salish people, I know I shouldn't say that, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, like Deborah said, we have weaving. If I were to come in my traditional regalia today, I'd be wearing a smoke cloth, a beautiful woven blanket. I'd have a woven headpiece on my head as well. So this right now is beautiful, but it doesn't represent the people that were on stage today. Since time immemorial, we are the descendants from the first families who made first contact. We are the first people of these lands. We entered through various portals, sent as instructors and caretakers, some from the skies and some from the seas, some from these rocks and some from these trees. But then some of us were sent back to do the work again because this is our way. My heart is the earth and the earth is my heart. My heart is the earth and the earth is my heart. We listen to all the little birds, the crickets, the frogs, peep-pom, wakas, 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 wakas. The owls, zitmu, they tell us when it is time. Smoked salmon, candied salmon, salmon sashimi. These weavings are mathematical and scientific formulas and not just art. Holistic health, probiotics, omega-3s, superfoods, proteins, natural nutrients from this land. Living off this land, plant medicine, we need this plant medicine. Deer, elk, and butter clams, oologans, sturgeons, our roots. Cedar roots, since time immemorial. Sent as caretakers and instructors, the creation story passed on from centuries ago. It's written in the land and it's told in the language. Markers all across these sacred lands. House posts at YVR once host to 7 Musqueam village sites and UBC with 5 or more. Entranceways at Stanley Park, Quay Quay. Weavings at Safeways, BC Place, CBC buildings, and Spindle World in malls and manhole covers across this city. But this often goes unnoticed. Like when contact was made, we were here. Every village site has a name and a purpose, and every path in between is important. But this often goes unnoticed. Today we call them by their archaeological dig titles, rights and titles. In our backyard today, under the same golden sun, my children swim in a plastic pool on a site called DHRT Pool, where 7,000-year-old plus cedar basket fragments were found. Written in the land is our Section 35 Royal Proclamation inherent right to this Indian Act land, which maybe we can never really own again. But yet we live in the exact same place that our ancestors once did, and 6 feet under is the history. And in this city, before this city, populations of 35,000, once at one village site, Marpole, 70th and Granville. El Mayu, a village site we call Jericho. El Mayu, my warrior son, Alistair Jericho. My heart is the earth, and the earth is my heart. Amini Takakuni. Take the
Hi, Tepka.
Thank you. I'd like to now introduce today's facilitators, Rup Sidhu and Aslam Balburia. Did I get that right? How was that? And Jocelyn McDougall. Please welcome. Thank you.
Grab a microphone from out there.
Hi, everyone. One more time. Hi, everybody. Nice.
Hello, everybody. My full name is Rupinder Singh Sidhu. Most everybody calls me Rup. It is such an honor to be here with you all today. I am just lifted in my spirit, in my heart, in my mind by the present panel that we just witnessed. Already so much rich learning, I believe, is happening in this room.
Thank you very much. My name is Aslam Balburia. I am deeply honored and grateful to be part of this facilitation team and to be sharing space and time with all of you today. So blown away by what was just shared with us already this morning so far, and looking forward to the rest of the conversations that we're going to be having today.
And hi, everyone. My name is Jocelyn McDougall, and I just want to echo what my wonderful team members here have said, both that I am sitting in the incredible basket of learning that we've already been offered this morning. There's some fantastic bits that I'm collecting and writing down and taking with me, looking forward to weaving throughout the day. And I also, right here, right now, want to say thank you both to these two. We've been working together with an incredible team at the city to put this day together for you. So right now, we're just going to give you a little bit of context and a little bit of what you might like to weave your way through today in a good way. And I also need to change the slide. Heather, would you do me a wonderful favor? And when I say, please change the slide, Heather, you just hit that space bar. Thanks, Heather. We're also working with the incredible team here at Civic Theaters, and they have been spectacular. I'm sure many of you know that from your own relationships. All right, please hit the space bar. All right, we just wanted to give a sense of where today's symposium fits in the overall context of the Creative City Strategy process that's been underway now for a good 18 months. So we started with the discovery. We went through a whole series of engagement events where we were working in community to really hear what was up for people and what folks were looking for in the next 10-year plan. And now we're in our symposium event here, Directions, and moving into preparing the actual report, which will be coming out in the next couple of months. Can I get the next slide, please? Rup, I thought you might be able to speak to this one, just in terms of the lens through which we've been putting this together.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see the diagram here, and this is really when we first got together to start speaking about where we could design this day, and within the strategy with the amazing Meta Brown, we started having this conversation. And the ecology of Vancouver is deep. From thousands and thousands of years old traditions to all forms of other things that we started to consider about what are the intersections of all of these various different aspects of our culture, of our people that make up this city, and how are we interacting? And how can we move through these ideas of equity, reconciliation, and all these various different things that we started to consider. But I just want to invite you all to take a look and really take this in, because for me, this really kind of head maps a lot of the lens with which we looked at the design of today through.
And for more on the context of the strategy, there are a couple of posters out in the lobby which will feature the previous diagram and also this one that'll give you a little bit more context about where we're sitting in the course of the overall strategy. So we'll invite you to check those out at the breaks and at lunchtime. Heather, could we have the next slide, please? So one of my good friends, who's also an excellent facilitator, Kari McClellan, likes to use the metaphor for the goals of the day being the place we're trying to get to, and then subsequent we're going to talk about our agreements as the vehicle we want to be in to get to where we're going together. So right now we're just going to talk a little bit about how we've envisioned coming together today and what we're trying to get out of that.
So in my culture and tradition, within the Islamic tradition, we usually start off everything with setting our intentions. And it said that deeds are judged based on their intentions. So these goals are some of the things that we're setting out to do together. And I invite you to also think about what are your personal intentions for the day. Is it to build relationships with certain people, to deepen your connection with the arts community that we have in Vancouver, and then also to consider adding these to your list of things that we're trying to do collectively. So the first is obviously to listen with an open heart, to hear from local and visiting experts and storytellers, from the knowledge keepers and artists. And I think we already had so much wonderful listening and hearing that happened already this morning.
Absolutely. Next up, we want to explore critical needs and opportunities facing the sector with colleagues in Vancouver's arts and culture ecology. If we take just a moment to actually take a look around the room.
Dave, I know I didn't give you this heads up, but if we could get a little bit of light in the house, it would be great. There we go.
What you're seeing is a group of people that care about where Vancouver is heading. Folks that have taken time out of their lives to come and inform this conversation that we're having today and to move us forward in a good way.
Our next goal is to build and strengthen relationships. So just along the line of what Rup was just saying, many of you already know each other, so let's deepen those relationships, those friendships. And also, there are folks in this room that you don't know that care about the arts and culture community here in Vancouver just as much as you. So I'm hoping that with the various discussions that we have on tap for you today, that there's going to be some great opportunities for you to connect with folks that you don't know and understand different perspectives of the ways in which people care about this community.
And finally, we've got today's intention to inform the directions and priorities for the Creative City strategy. So as you saw on the previous slide, the strategy is being written at the moment and will be presented to Council pretty soon. And today's discussions, as you'll see, are being captured with our graphic recorders. We've got support facilitators in each of the sessions, and the things that you say will inform the direction that the Creative City strategy is headed. While we're on this, I just wanted to make a note that what Christy did just now is absolutely encouraged. The way that she noticed that the graphic recording didn't accurately capture what she had envisioned happening within the session, to make that note to our wonderful graphic recorders. I've had the great fortune of working with many of them before, and they're so open to feedback so that we can make sure that everybody's on the same page, that when we leave that session, we can say that that's a good capturing of what actually happened in that session. So please feel free to interact and make sure that certain points are noted if you find them really important, and we can all walk away with a similar shared understanding of what actually took place this day, because it's important that that's accurately captured for the way that we inform the strategy going forward.
Thanks, Aslam. Could we have the next slide, please? So the goals were the vehicle, were the destination, and the community agreements are the vehicle, the clown car that we're going to get in together and go to there. Rup, will you kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we want to be with each other? And, you know, I think one of the things that we really wanted to bring out and is just to lead with curiosity and creativity. To move with that idea of curiosity. We don't know everybody's stories in here. We don't know where everybody is coming from. Everybody has a story that they are bringing to the space. So we can try and leave our assumptions a little bit farther behind and bring our curiosities farther forward. Also, we are the creative sector. So when we're facing issues and ideas that are sometimes, you know, maybe not lining up, what are the creative solutions that we can think of? And what are those moments that we can take to really kind of step into our creativity to think about these things that we're facing?
We want to cultivate generosity and accountability. So these two things go hand in hand, generosity, accountability. What do we mean by that? We want to enter the conversations from a place of generosity. We want to assume that others are entering the conversation from a place of generosity. And we want to be accountable and hold one another accountable in a context of open dialogue, in a context of truth. We want to encourage folks to speak from their personal experience, that their truth is true because it is theirs, and to hold one another accountable to staying in one's truth. So to enter with generosity and also to hold one another accountable, to build positive dialogues.
And on that, we also want you to take space and make space. So I'm sure many of you are used to being in leadership positions where you're being called to speak a lot. And if that's a position that you find yourself in often, use this as an opportunity to take a step back, to make space for other people to share their perspectives and their views. And similarly, if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of space in which to talk and have their views heard, use this as an opportunity to take up some space and to have your voice heard and to contribute your lived experience and your really valuable insights and diverse perspectives into this conversation. Quite often we'll find that the solutions to the problems that we're facing will come from the margins, from those voices that we're not used to hearing. And if you're one of those people who thinks that you have something important to say, please bring that forward in the space today.
We want to encourage you to take care of yourselves and one another. Part of taking care of one another is exactly what Aslam just outlined for us around taking space and also making space. And when we're talking about taking care of yourself, if you need to stand up and move, if you need to leave a conversation at a moment for any reason, if you need to eat a thing, if you need to go to the washroom, you take care of yourselves and do what you need to do in order to show up and be fully present when you are there in the room.
Lastly, we just want to expect and accept non-closure. We're going to be talking about things that we have been facing for many, many years and that we'll be discussing and finding solutions for many years to come. So just in that, remember to expect and accept non-closure. That within our 90-minute sessions, we won't necessarily find kind of the end goal for equity or the end goal for various situations, but what we are on is a learning journey to those places.
Thanks, Roop. Heather, could we have the next slide, please? So I was going to run you through the whole schedule, but you know what? You all have that in your little hands. You got them in your programs on the way in, and there's signage around the building, and I want to make sure that we have lots of time for networking at our break coming right up shortly. I do want to draw your attention to the various elements of community care that are available to you throughout the day, and if there's anything that you need that isn't on this list and you need to ask someone for it, you can feel free to ask any of the three of us or any of our volunteers who are so kindly sharing their time with us today. I wanted to tease out one detail about the schedule that will be different from that which is in your program, and that is this afternoon, immediately after lunch, one of our breakout sessions, Aslam is leading it in fact, was originally scheduled to take place in the studio downstairs, but due to great interest has been moved into this space here in the auditorium. So securing local arts and culture spaces at 2 p.m. will be taking place here in the auditorium. Any other comments about community care, guys?
I think we could just roll through it. We got gender inclusive bathrooms again. You need to find any of those. There's a list of volunteers and a whole bunch of signs we put up at 6 a.m. this morning. Please look to see where priority seating is for folk. Of course, we have our ASL interpretation happening. Vocal eye description is available for those of you that don't know that. That is for folks with sight impairment. That descriptions can be given to what's happening. There's childminding downstairs. Prayer room is also
downstairs.
Quiet room is
up in the balcony.
Up in the balcony. And then yeah, we'll be breaking for break soon, but a couple things before that.
Yeah. One more slide, please. Social media, tell everybody everything about what you love and what's happening. We will be having, I'm just singing away up here. We will actually have a roaming photo booth, everyone, which will be out there during the breaks, during lunchtime. So we'll have a fantastic city volunteer who will be coming around with a whiteboard where you can write your thoughts about the Creative City Strategy. Oh, awesome. Oh, I love this. This is great. So you write your thoughts, and then we'll take your picture with your phone, and then you can post to your Instagram and hashtag Creative City Strategy. It's not short, but it's very clear. And we've got our handles up here, so please do indeed connect with us on all the platforms. And I think we may be at the end of our session because we moved Christy. Christy wisely moved her contribution to the end of the panel. Lara, Maida, anything that we're missing? No? Let's rock the session. So we have at 11:30 a.m. right here in the auditorium, advancing reconciliation, equity, and accessibility in granting.
Over in the salon, we're going to be looking at joy and resilience in community-engaged arts.
And downstairs in the studio, we're going to be having a session on sharing administrative and space services.
So 11:30, be there or here or be square, and we'll see you for the rest of the day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.